The American Revolution is sold as the origin story for modern democracy, the fight for liberty, brave colonists standing up against British tyranny. But if you strip it back to what actually happened, who made those decisions, who funded the wars, and why, a very different picture starts to emerge. The real fight wasn't between freedom and tyranny. It was between colonial elites and the British Crown over money. From 1754 to 1763, Britain fought the 7 Years' War to defend and expand its colonial holdings in North America, spending enormous sums of money to secure territory from the French. The war was fought largely on colonial soil, with colonial militias being supported by thousands of British regulars. It ends with Britain gaining vast tracts of land, especially in French Canada and the Ohio Valley. And the immediate response from the colonial elites? They were furious. Why? Because instead of opening the new land for settler speculation and westward expansion, Britain issues the Proclamation of 1763, closing off the western frontier and protecting Indigenous territory. From the Crown's perspective, this is a stabilizing gesture. Secure the border, reduce costs, and prevent another expensive war. From the colonial elite's perspective, it was a betrayal. They believed they were entitled to territory expansion for their loyalty. The Proclamation of 1763 forbids Western settlements past the Appalachians. It declares that land past this line is Indigenous territory. This angers the land speculators. It is the single most economically significant imperial restriction placed on the colonies. And it triggers the land-hungry elite to start pushing for independence. Then, in 1764, the Crown passes the Sugar Act. This is designed to tighten customs enforcements on sugar and molasses trade. It's the British Crown trying to clamp down on smuggling. It threatens powerful merchants like John Hancock, who had made his fortune through smuggling. In response to this, legal arguments start circulating in printed pamphlets. Lawyers and pamphleteers frame the Sugar Act as a constitutional crisis. So, in 1765, the British passed the Stamp Act. This required you to pay stamps on all printed materials, newspapers, contracts, pamphlets, etc. This is seen by colonial elites as a direct tax on the means of political communication. In response to this, they launched their first major coordinated protests. They formed the Sons of Liberty, a semi-secret society of elite agitators and merchants. And pamphlet production explodes. They start to hold public protests as theatre. Hanging effigies, staged riots, symbolic burnings, and newspapers start to reprint speeches, turning the grievances of wealthy colonists into populist slogans. Britain repeals the Stamp Act due to pressure. This has a psychological effect. It validates protest as a tactic. It creates a feedback loop. Protest, repeal, momentum. Wealthy colonists realize British policy is reactive. If they keep up the pressure, if they shape the emotion and create the people as the political force driving their demands. Wealthy colonists repeatedly describe British taxes as enslavement. They called the Stamp Act chains. They called the Tea Act tyranny. And they printed pamphlets warning that the colonies were being reduced to slavery. This was said in public, in print, by men like Thomas Jefferson, who, despite enslaving at least 600 people, is quoted in reference to British taxes as saying, "We have been reduced to slavery." George Washington warned of chains being forged in London, but based on the slave census of 1799, of the 317 enslaved people who lived with him at his residence in Mount Vernon, at least 120 of them were under the age of 16. He assigned chores and physical labor to children as young as 4, and he would separate them from their parents deliberately. The world that he built and the legacy that he left is a system of extraction, surveillance, and human trafficking. What he fought for was to remove British imperial oversight because he felt they were getting too moralistic. This hypocrite spoke of republican virtues, but his own plantation was run like a prison. He freed 0 enslaved people during his presidency, despite enormous symbolic power to do so. He only freed his personal slaves in his will after his wife died, and he still did not free the majority of the enslaved community at Mount Vernon because they were technically owned by the estate. They used the word enslaved not as a reference to living bondage, but as a metaphor for trade oversight and land restrictions. The power of this metaphor was its emotional weight, but the reality behind it was empty. They were not fighting for liberation from slavery. They were fighting for the freedom to continue profiting off it.